Good evening and welcome to Chambers here at the Southbridge Town Hall. It is Tuesday, August 15th. It is approximately 7:45 and we are having a joint meeting of the Town Council and the Southbridge School Committee. Tonight's agenda, we have a presentation. So the first order will be on the call to order. So could we have a roll call vote, please, of the Town Council and of the School Committee?
Councilor O'Clair, Councilor Carrasco,
Councilor Carrasco informed us he wouldn't be available this evening.
Councilor Clements,
will be delayed. Present.
Councilor DePietro, Councilor McKenzie,
Present.
Councilor Miana,
Present.
Councilor Morales,
Present.
Councilor Nash,
Present.
Councilor Steves,
Present.
Mr. Bishop,
Present.
Ms. Duval,
Present.
Mr. Lazo,
Present.
Dr. Page,
Present.
Ms. Peliquin, Mix Ryan,
Present.
Mr. Thomo,
Present.
7 present from the council and 6 present from the school committee.
Thank you. Ms. Megan, I don't know if you had heard Councilor Clare will be delayed.
Okay.
Okay. Agenda item number 3 is the presentation by Interim Receiver Superintendent Russell Johnson.
Great.
So thank you very
Thank you,
much.
members of the council and members of our school committee. I'm pleased to be with you here tonight to give you an update on essentially how we have closed out school year 16-17 and how we are opening school year 17-18. My presentation will focus on key issues that I know are of concern to these two committees, these two groups from within Southbridge, which are particularly relating to the budget, and particularly the closeout from last fiscal year and how we're opening this fiscal year. If you have questions as I go along, I'd encourage you to ask them, and certainly at the end I'll be glad to take your questions as well. So just starting off, I'm not going to do a complete repeat of the information you heard about the progress that was made in the district last year, but there are some key things that I want to make sure that you're aware of as we round out last year and start this new school year. And really starting with the curriculum. A lot of work had been done in Southbridge in the past to make sure that we have good curriculum materials for our teachers. But a question that I always like to ask is, if I'm a new 3rd grade teacher here in Southbridge, would I know what to teach? And can I make sure that what I'm teaching is aligned to what the other teachers at my grade level, either in my same school, if I'm at West Street, do I know that the same 3rd grade teachers at Charlton Street are also teaching a similar content so that they're all of our students can be prepared for 4th grade? So a lot of work was last year put into developing new curriculum units, particularly in math. And it was work that was really engaged in very deliberately by our teachers, and it's ready for even more consumption this year. So very pleased about the progress that was made relative to the development of curriculum. There's really no more important work for our kids than to do just that, to know what we're teaching in our schools. We also know that there was a tremendous infusion of additional technology resources for both staff and for students. And one of the things that we heard when we initially were thinking about the receivership and in the early days of the receivership itself was about the supports for our English learners in the district. And in fact, there is now more staffing to support our English learners and a better identification process. And identifying the right students for English learner support actually translates to money for the district as well. And so better identifying and improving our supports for those students is the right thing to do educationally and fiscally for Southbridge. Since I arrived at the beginning of June, there's been some important work that we've had to do to get ready for this upcoming school year. So as we really gathered together to figure out what our priorities were for this upcoming school year, it was really continued work on those curriculum units, very much in the area of English language arts, because as I said before, last year a lot of work was devoted to math. In the past, various efforts have been made at knowing what we want to teach our students in the way of English language arts, but we needed to pull those efforts together. And I was very pleased that we were able to engage teachers from Southbridge this summer to work on developing units. And as we start the new school year next week and welcome our teachers back, the teachers will be hearing from each other about the curriculum guides that they've developed at each grade level to support our learners, particularly at the elementary level. And similar work has been done at the middle school and the high school as well. Again, really focusing on curriculum. In addition, one of the things that we wanted to change from last year to this year is more of a focus on school-based empowerment. The turnaround plan, I think, is a very solid plan. It's a very ambitious plan for what we want to see improved for the district. But there's a very big difference between what it means to translate that turnaround plan for the students at Eastford Road School, for example, who are our youngest learners, grades pre-K through 1. And it's a different scenario for what it means to translate the turnaround plan at the high school. So we've been working with the principals very deliberately this summer for them to develop their own school improvement plans based on the turnaround plan that will help to guide themselves and their teachers together with teacher input to make sure that we can take the turnaround plan written for the district and really apply it to each and every school in a unique way. And the principals have been very motivated by that, and I'm excited about bringing the teachers on board with that further as well. The teachers union is excited about it, and so I think it will continue to breathe life into this turnaround effort for our community. In addition, an important point, as I made at the beginning of this presentation, are improvements that we had to make to the budget from last fiscal year and then as we go into this fiscal year. So I'd like to talk to you about what some of those important improvements have been. First of all, I want to, this is just a sort of an outline of what I'll be talking to you about. The punchlines, the key takeaway items are that we did end the fiscal year 17 in a balanced way. We didn't end the year in a deficit. There's some observations that I'd like to make for you about the closeout of that budget and some of the contracting and procurement of services in particular. And then as we look to fiscal year 18, I think what's important is that we are able to fund our priorities within our means for this upcoming year, meaning that we aren't starting fiscal year 18 in a deficit situation, which again, I think is very good news. So I'd like to take you a little bit inside the numbers to make this even clearer to you. And just starting on the revenue side. So in fiscal year 17, this is sort of a picture of where the revenues for the school district were and where they came from. So as you can see, it's a little hard to make out, but the largest portion of the funding at 61%, this is a test of my vision, are through Chapter 70 funds from the state. The local contribution is 20, I can't see that actually. 22%, thank you. Revolving funds are at 7% and grants are at 10%. And so particularly thinking about the grants is something that I'd like to share with you, because in my conversations with committee members from both the council and from the school committee, I wanted to shine a little bit more of a light on what those grant sources were last year and to help you just learn a little bit more about them. So last year there were a combination of grant sources, and I combined them into two different categories. First, we have entitlement grants. So those are grants that we don't have to apply for in a competitive way. Those are grant funds that we're entitled to because of our identification of students with disabilities, because of our need to educate students from poverty through Title I. Those are resources that are just allocated to every learning community, every district, every local education agency in Massachusetts. In addition, there were funds that I categorize as discretionary funds, discretionary grants, meaning that these were grant monies that were only given to Southbridge, particularly those first two lines that came from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which were the Strategy Support Grant and the School Redesign Grant for planning for the middle and high school. So really our mission there is to make sure that as we start this turnaround process, we know that there needs to be an infusion of extra dollars, not for operational costs, not for salaries of our teachers, not for pay increases, but for the initial costs that it takes to begin a turnaround process. And then the district also applied for an additional grant from the Nellie Mae Foundation and was provided those funds that stretch over both last fiscal year and this fiscal year. So I put in a little note up there about supplement versus supplant. These discretionary funds in particular couldn't be used for another source. They couldn't be used for salaries for teachers, for example, because that would be supplanting. That would be taking the money that the district already needed to spend for those salaries if we had tried to use these additional grant monies, and we didn't. We legitimately applied those grant monies towards the turnaround process. And so important to know, I know this is information that as I've met with, again, members of the council, members of the committee, they said I didn't have a full picture of this. So I wanted to being in response to those individual discussions that I've had this summer, I wanted to bring this information to you tonight so that you could see it clearly. And I've just tried to really boil it down and make it as user-friendly as I can. Then we moved to the expenditure side, and one of the concerns that have been brought to me was, were we in deficit? Did we end fiscal year 17 in the hole, in a sense? And really through a lot of work, and we appreciate the support of the town in this process, we were able to make sure that we closed out fiscal year 17 with a balanced budget, and that we did not, as you can see there, we spent down to the dollar. There is not right now anything that we are concerned about in the way of additional invoices that are going to surprise us from fiscal year 17. So we're pleased about that. In addition, as a sign of the health of the budget, this gets a little bit complicated, but remember I told you about those discretionary grants and other entitlement grants? Particularly on the entitlement grant side, the grant cycle goes until the end of August. And so there's funding that we have to reserve to make sure that we can spend it during the summer months to get us through till the end of the current grant, and then we start the next grant cycle on September 1st. The good news about the $254,000 that you see there is that we didn't spend it down by the end of June. We still have those funds available as planned, as needed, to pay for services and salaries, because entitlement funds can be used for salaries through the end of the grant process. So a little bit weedy there, but to me that $254,000 is a good sign that we didn't spend everything that we had and leave us with nothing. We spent in a planful way to have those funds available for these months. In addition, we enter into this new fiscal year with $144,000 in our revolving accounts. That does not include school lunch funds, because that's a different cost center unto itself, and I didn't want to include those dollars here, to make it clear. Pausing to see if there are any questions.
Right, okay, Chairman Bishop.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. How much money did we take out of revolving accounts to meet the normal operating needs?
Right, it's a good question, and I'd have to get back to you on that. It was it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I would need to get back to you on it, but it was, I would say, north of $100,000, far north.
Thank you.
Okay. School member Lawson.
On the summer, we've had a summer feeding program in Southbridge for years, and it used to run in the red, and we were going to stop it, and they received a grant for it. Did we get the grant again this year?
Right. So I did write to the school committee members about this a few weeks ago, because it was asked at our last meeting, and we appreciated the question.
I missed the meeting.
Right. No, that's okay. So what happened was we had a new director of our food service program. The granting authority for that particular funding source emailed the previous director. So our new director didn't get that grant application. That has been corrected, and we won't miss it again in the future.
Thank you.
Ms. Ryan?
Thank you for you. My question is, how is the opening up of the charter school going to affect the state portion of that pie? What is going to happen to that fund, since it's 61% of the pie? Is it going to now be a lesser amount, and we're going to have to rely more on local funds?
Sure. So keeping in mind this is looking back at last year in terms of the percentage, but we would anticipate it staying fairly stable for fiscal year 18. It's fiscal year 19 where the question will be for us. And we appreciate that Town Manager Ron Sanangelo has repeatedly brought this as a concern, and we know that we need to plan for that for fiscal year 19. We're not blind to the fact that there'll be a change in revenue as a result of that. And that's part of the process for planning our budget during this fiscal year.
Councilor Stevenson.
Mr. Johnson, I was curious, to follow up on Jackie's question, what is the ESE and the state going to do to help us to deal with the charter situation?
Sure. So the charter school exists, and we can't change that. And so really, I think it's a lot about making our schools as great as we possibly can here, and I think we are moving forward in a lot of positive ways to retain our students in Southbridge. In addition, we know that we have to do some real problem solving around this, and so you have our commitment and our team's commitment to work with the town and our school committee during this year to plan for that.
Is there anything that DESE can do to help us make up for the loss of some of those funds? Because, I mean, we have dozens of kids. The vast majority of the kids that are going to this charter school are from Southbridge.
Right, right.
By a large majority.
Right. So as you can see, we are already providing, in terms of the dollars that the state agency is providing, are already sizable. And could they go up? Potentially, but I think we want to make sure that, as was raised before, we want to make sure that the turnaround process is sustainable. And so if we were to infuse additional dollars from the state agency into Southbridge to make up for those lost funds, it would have to be done if at all, it would have to be done on a very temporary basis, because ultimately we have to determine how we can continue to live within our means and keep our budget sustainable. So it will be a challenge for us as we go into our budget planning process for fiscal year 19, but we will approach it in a problem-solving way and figure it out and determine if we do need some additional funds. But as you can see, the dollar amounts aren't small already in terms of what the state agency is providing, and we'd want to make sure that we don't go so far along with that it makes it hard to ever figure out how to solve this problem from within.
Okay, Councilor McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Number one, I'm having difficulty hearing you.
I'm sorry.
And I don't think it's you, I think it's the system tonight. But if you could just try to speak a little bit louder or into the mic. Also, do you think that you will have very little difficulty in operating with the school budget that's already been put into place for this year? Because
sure.
I know you're going to have you may have a lot of changes, you may have a lot of different implementations that you want to place, different hirings.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned actually at the beginning, that third bullet point that I included in the presentation is that we are able to fund our priorities during this fiscal year. So the amount of funding we have can go to fund our priorities without being in a deficit situation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear? Are you okay?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm trying to give him
Okay. Sorry. Very nice of you.
Great. So moving on, one of the
excuse me.
Please.
Yes. Raise my hand.
Sorry.
So you're saying that the FY17 budget is balanced at this point?
Correct.
In your opinion, or from what you've been told, or what
Correct.
you're working with? Correct. So we're working with our town accountant as well?
Correct.
With this balanced budget? Karen, do you want to, what are you saying on this, or seeing on this, in terms of the FY17 budget? Any concerns that we should know about from your perspective?
I don't feel that there are concerns, but I just wanted to mention that that the state has dropped off some journal entries to me the other day. I had a chance to go through them, but officially it is still not 100% balanced. There were some things, that I'm looking for, like a grant amendment, and there's still a small, there would still be a gap after that. So I ran a report today, and it was still about 143,000 unbalanced, still in a deficit. So I just I just wanted to bring that out just to say we still have a little bit more work to do.
Sure. Right. But I'm also confident that we're going to get there without any concern.
Sorry, Councilor McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Karen, would you be able to give me that figure again, 143?
Yes, when I ran the report, it was about 143,000. There was a journal entry that was in question for like about 104,000 that I just needed some more information on a grant, which would then bring it down to about $38,000. So there's still a few things that we do have to work out before it's actually balanced.
Thank you.
Councilor Steves?
I was curious, actually, follow up on that. Do you have any idea where this money, what elements of the budget this money was coming from?
Well, there were various funding sources. There were revolving funds, there was some grants, there was some in between different grants reclassified. So that's what I mean, where there was a question about how much has come from revolving funds. I mean, I don't have a figure, but it would be quite a bit that's coming from the revolving funds. I'm not sure where the balance will come from, but there are different pots of money that the state is looking into
What was it
to
used for,
close
any idea?
to close the gap.
Any idea what it was used for? Oh,
Do you want- Yes, please. You are, again?
Good evening. My name is Ventura Rodriguez, and I work with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. I've been supporting the district for a little over a year, and I've been working in the last couple of months specifically on finance support. Some of the town council members remember me from last year's budget presentations where I had a chance to address the panel. And I just want to clarify, I think just end on the point that Karen just said, is that as part of the ending of a fiscal year, you know, it's a natural process that we're going through journal entries where you have grants and other sources of funding that, you know, some funds were charged to the general fund, and now you're going through a journal entry process to make sure that they're assigned to the grants or funding source where they should have been charged to originally. So that's the exercise we're going through now. You know, as Karen said, we submitted those journal entries a little over a week ago. There's backup that Karen goes through as part of her due diligence to go through that information. The amount that was quoted, as Karen said, about $104,000 is just getting an amendment to her office for a special education grant. I believe that we journaled some expenses to, and there are plenty of resources to cover, you know, the balance. So we're really going through an accounting exercise to make sure that everything is accounted for and assigned to the grants where they belong.
Chairman Bishop?
Thank you. Revolving accounts, I want to come back to that. We borrowed, did you say 400,000? Or we used, was that, I couldn't hear you, Russ, honestly.
Sure, I'm sorry. I'd like to get back to you with the exact number. I
Okay.
said it's over 100,000.
Okay. Over. How many revolving accounts do we have, Ms. Hanley, for the school department, excluding federal food lunch?
Several.
Several.
I don't know the number off the top of my head.
I'll be in to see you this week. I'd like to find out how many revolving accounts the district has, how much was in there at the start of this past school year, and how much is remaining. If we're borrowing that kind of money, I mean, those revolving accounts are designed specifically for what they were created for, whether it's the school user fees, whether it's for, you know, and that's why I'd like to get to the bottom of that. But borrowing or using revolving monies for normal expenditures doesn't sound like a logical progression to me. But I'm just me.
Yes, go ahead, Karen.
If I could, I just want to point out, though, that some of the funds have built up over several years. And some of the ones that are being used would be like the rental revolving, the school choice, and then the circuit breakers, because we can only carry over 1 year, so we have to make sure that the fiscal year 16 balance is done. But those are the more ones with the higher balances in them.
Thank you.
A question, Karen. Revolving funds with our budget, we generally have to revote those each year, the various revolving funds. Is that the same with school? Does school committee take care of that, or?
There's different type of revolvings. There's some that will go over from year to year, like the rental revolving, and then there's certain ones that fall under the Mass General laws that have to be reauthorized each year. So these would be the ones that continue from year to year. And one thing that I can say, you know, as the school and the town goes over the journal entries, you know, I mean, we reviewed them, and in my professional opinion, there wouldn't be anything charged there that would not be appropriate for that. So I just want to give you that, you know, some kind of comfort in that, you know, that it would be used for the purpose of what the money was taken in for.
Thank you.
Are we all set? Okay.
I have another question.
Councilor Stevenson.
Thank you. Actually, if we can jump back for a second. Earlier, you mentioned about $1.1 million in discretionary money going to being used for the turnaround. Could you explain a little bit more about what that money actually was used for, and specifically, if it's how much of it is specific to the operations that you're doing, and is any of it likely to be stuff that, since it's basically it's discretionary money, we may not ever see it again? How much of this stuff is going to have to get rolled into our budget over the course of the long term?
Sure. So, as an example, I was telling you about the math curriculum units that we developed that we have now on hand and able to be used during this upcoming school year. To develop those units, we need our teachers to work after hours. In many cases, they worked on Saturdays during the past school year. And they were led by a contractor, two specialists in the area of math curriculum development, to create those curriculum units. So now that those units are created, we don't have to recreate them. And that contractor who worked with the teachers was paid out of this discretionary, out of these fundings, particularly in that case, the strategic support grant, in order to make sure that we had, a product that we can use on behalf of our students during this new school year. So as an example of the type of thing that we would use that for. We wouldn't use it for a teacher's salary, because to your point, we wouldn't want to be charging operational costs against those grant sources and then have them go away and have us stuck with a salary that we couldn't afford in the future. So things like professional development, curriculum development, consulting support on developing programs for the district. Those are the types of things that the money could be used for.
Councilor DePietro, do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. These gentlemen have certainly staffed at the answers to the question I'm about to ask, but and the acoustics is terrible in here. But discretionary funds, I believe, was how it was described in subcommittee regarding a substantial amount of money. I'd love to see a breakdown of that, certainly, and I'm wondering if that's going to be provided at some point.
And I'm sorry, the specific request is a breakdown on...
What was described as discretionary funds? I don't have the figure in front of me, but it was quite substantial.
Sure. So you mean the dollar amounts that I have up here? Or are you talking about another source of discretionary funds?
Excuse me, Councilor DePietro, are you referring to the unclassified that was referred to earlier, or?
Oh, no, Madam Chair. I mean, tremendous presentation, but I really don't see where all that money went.
I think he's just following up on the question that I asked, actually. Although the unclassified stuff would be a nice thing to know, too.
Papers, pencils, bouncy balls. You've got these main categories.
Sure. So we can certainly break those dollars out further and explain the type of sources that they were used to fund.
Well, I wouldn't expect you to do it tonight, sir, but certainly on paper.
Sure, that's what I'm saying. We can follow up with that information for you. Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, if I may, I was very disappointed not to see the Pledge of Allegiance at the top of our roster this evening.
I apologize for that. The agenda came, and I will make sure in the future that it's always there for us.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Councilor Manna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Dr. Johnston or Johnson?
Johnston.
Okay. I'm a little confused on your budget not being balanced. We have a deadline for us that the budget has to be balanced. And when we were told that our budget was balanced, that included the school budget, but you're telling us that the budget is not balanced. So I'm just a little confused. If you could just clarify.
So, we were talking before about so according to where we believe we are right now, where we are right now, is that we have been able to balance the general fund of the budget. There are journal entries that need to be made, which are sort of the fine-tuning process, but it isn't going to leave a deficit. So we need to reassign some of the costs from things that, and I used to be a superintendent in another community. And during the course of the year, sometimes you charge expenses against certain accounts, particularly general fund, when you know that at the end of the year or at some point during the fiscal year, you're going to take those costs and assign them to a grant. That it, sort of in the interest of getting services provided for students, you might charge them against the general fund, but it's allowable to take those funds and, in the end, charge them against a grant where they should belong in the first place. But there's nothing wrong with doing a journal entry to make that work by the ultimate closeout of the books. And so at this point, as you could see, hopefully from the interchange between my colleague, Dr. Rodriguez, and Ms. Harnoy, is that we are in that process right now of completing the journal entries. But it doesn't leave us with a concern that we won't still stand behind this completely.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Continue, yes, please.
Thank you. Important observations from when we actually began this work then at the end of May, beginning of June, around the process that was used for providing services to the district for educational reasons using those discretionary funds. So what we found was that a lot of the decision-making process was made in a decentralized way, meaning that there weren't sort of tight controls around how contracts were being developed in order to provide educational services. So I can tell you that the contracts that were created were of an educational nature. We're not concerned that they were not going to legitimate educational vendors or to educational vendors for services. And we know that they were reasonably calculated to be in support of the turnaround plan. But what had happened was that there were not sort of central controls over all of the procedures that it took to get those services in place for the district. And so in the end, what had to be done is that we immediately had to work, again, through the school department and with the town to understand the situation and bring those controls in order. So in the end, what I would say is best practices were not followed in terms of the process for securing services and materials at all times for the students in the district. It relates to the use of those discretionary funds that I was telling you about. So it's not about how we paid for utilities or teachers' contracts or anything like that, the major sources of expenditure for the district. But what we needed to do, again, was to make sure that those best practices were followed as we closed out last fiscal year as best as possible, and definitely in place as we begin this fiscal year. So what we've done is that we've brought in staff from our finance unit to be able to assist in reconciling the fiscal year 17 budget. That the staff also from our finance unit provided assistance to implement a fiscally sound budget for the new fiscal year, for fiscal year 18. We've also provided training to administrators both in the central office and in the schools, just to help them understand what a streamlined and effective process is when we know that we need something for our students, when we know we have a funding source. Certainly, there's a lot of interest and excitement in wanting to bring the right things for our students, but there's a process, and we've made sure that our administrators across the board are very mindful of that process and aware. And then, finally, we are working to bring in a lead partner to oversee the business and human resources functions of the school department, because for too long we've had such a high rate of turnover in the business office that the systems aren't in place in order for us to make sure that we can keep those best practices in place all the time, as well as just all of the other kind of HR systems that need to fit together with the budget systems so we can have an effectively running school department. And so rather than trying to hire another person off the street, we wanted to go with a very tried and true consultant to, not really consultant, an individual to do this work for us who has a track record of success, because we need to bring that track record to the district to get those systems in place. So we're very close to finalizing a contract that will allow that to happen, and we're confident that we can draw together the systems and procedures so that HR functions are speaking to business functions in a way that can give us confidence that the funding sources that we have for the district are used as effectively as possible.
Yes, Dr. Johnson. I'm wondering if this plan that you're putting into place with this this group is actually going to be fitting into the budget as well, because if you're talking about hiring an individual as opposed to a group, that's going to diminish many of your plans that you already haven't put into place. It could affect an operation as well. So I'm just curious how you would respond to that.
Sure, absolutely. And when I say that we have made sure that we're able to fund our priorities within our means, that includes having a lead partner as one of our priorities, because we know that we can't go along without getting our operations intact. So we are fully able to fund the support of this lead partner for the district.
Thank you.
Member Lazo.
No reflection on you, Dr. Johnston. I sat here a year ago, and there was a commissioner, not a deputy commissioner, in front of us that put together the A team with this receiver that was supposed to be outstanding, a finance director, which had more qualifications and more letters by his name than anybody I've ever seen. I sat back and I was cautiously optimistic. I didn't think it was going to work because the way you build things isn't the way the state builds things for a little town of Southbridge. Best practices, we were beaten over the head by Rob Curtin. God bless his report that he had. Half of it was right and half of it was phony. And then best practices. Okay, we brought in the A team, we brought in the state. We brought in every top gun. We had more doctorates up in the front office than Harrington Memorial Hospital. We had more directors than Hollywood. And we sat there and we thought we were going to have all the best practices. We were going to do it right. And then it imploded. The commissioner is now gone. The receiver is gone. The directors have all gone. I sit here and I look at you. And I really am cautiously optimistic because I am an optimist by nature. But I can't believe I'm being fed the same material 1 year later in a failed receivership that we just went through. And the town of Southbridge is thoroughly embarrassed. I know the elected officials. It's not about the money you gave us, councilors. You've given us money for the last 6 years. It's management. We must build a management team, not the state revolving door. Hey, I'm here today, I'm gone tomorrow. Now we're going to hire consultants. That's the curse. When you start hiring privatized people to come in to run your district, you're going to go through year 2 and you're going to have the same problems. But you had a school committee in charge. You had a line item budget. We went one line from the telephone bills to the water, everything. Now it's like a mass blanket of spending and explanations, which is fuzzy math to me. I've been in government over 30 years off and on, council, building committees, school committee. I don't have much faith in the state after this past year. I tried, I stayed away. I said maybe they do have the better idea. And maybe we weren't. I wasn't on the school committee that imploded the district. I ran to straighten out a problem because of my experience, along with a 30-year administrator, a 30-year teacher, a doctor at WPI, and various citizens that really want to work on this. We're going to still work on it. But I got to tell you, I got a sour taste in my mouth. I'm a Southbridge guy, and when a Southbridge guy gets a sour taste, it's all game. Every one of your professionals that come into this district should be held to a higher standard because they're getting paid a lot more money than we were paying them before. But as a district, I'm really cautiously optimistic, only because I'm an optimist, because I got to tell you, we sold a bill of goods a year ago. Instead of jumping in with us on massive oversight and jumping in on the search with us and help us pick the next superintendent, they pushed the button. And now it's all on them. The budget, the revolving door, the massive exodus of kids and employees. We've basically exterminated every experienced teacher by putting them on a list. They were good enough to teach our kids for 30 years, but then they were put on an incompetency list or a watch list, which, what did they do? They got jobs in other districts, or they retired. How'd it work? The biggest revolving door in the state right now is here. The other two are in receivership too. But I'm telling you, I am totally best practices. I'm laughing at that word because the state doesn't have the best practices. Look at our tax rate in the state. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So, Councilor Steves first, sorry, and then we'll move forward.
I don't know if I can follow that one, Scott. I am inclined to agree with at least half of three-quarters of what you just said. But I was specifically going to ask you about this, Dr. Johnson, to follow up on the whole contractor thing. How are you going to guarantee that we actually can become independent of this company when the receivership ends? Because I don't want to get stuck with some contractor. And also, to follow up on that, I'd love to know how much we're actually spending on contractors in the school district as a whole.
Sure.
There's way too many contractors going on across the board here.
Okay. So the contract is a one-year contract, renewable for as long as we need it. So it's a contract that is entered into with the understanding that we're building systems, but not necessarily needing this entity in the long term. And through the process of interviewing and hiring the firm that we believe will be ultimately chosen for this, it was with the understanding that that's their job, is to get us stable so that we ultimately don't need them forever, or that we can choose whether or not we need them, but not that we are sort of dependent upon those the support that they're providing. So it's very much about building systems that frankly need to be built, that if they're not built, we're not doing right by the funding sources that we have, including the taxpayers of Southbridge. So that's really where our mindset is, for sure.
Okay, and the other half of the question, can you provide us with more data on how many contractors we actually are already using?
Certainly.
And how much money is going to that kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
Thanks.
So we now have Mr. Tomo, Member Tomo. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Johnston, we've had a great turnover in staff last year and this year, and you've mentioned the word training a number of times. Do we have, or should we have, because of the new staff, a mentoring program for this new staff? I think it's very important that these new teachers coming in has someone to fall back on who's been in the system. Could you elaborate on that, or?
Certainly.
Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that, and it is actually a major area of focus for us right now. And one of our key team members is actually with us tonight, Ms. Amy Caruan, whose job it is actually, as part of her job, is to make sure that we have, she's an employee of the district, is to make sure that we have a strong mentoring program. She and I were just talking about it this afternoon, about where are our plans, how are we going to launch this, and really what's the work of the district. And you ask about the contractors and what's being done. There's a group called Research for Better Teaching that is widely known for being a real improvement agency in educational improvement in the state. Widely trusted, widely known. They've been working with our district last year and this year to help develop a common language about teaching and learning. And so they've actually, this same group, worked with our new teachers during new teacher orientation, which concludes tomorrow. So we've had 3 days with our new teachers, and they're developing this same language about how do we talk about learning? How do we understand learning and how it's happening? What is good instruction? And that same group, we anticipate using those materials that they're providing us for our mentors as well. So there's just a real continuity about how we're talking about teaching and learning, from administrators to veteran teachers to new teachers and mentors. So we're really trying to create a really tight system here of support for teachers.
Because I think that first 4 to 6 weeks for a new teacher is very important in terms of developing their attitude, or how they feel about their environment. So a lot of times you could lose someone real quick if they don't have someone to fall back to.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Member Ryan?
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions. One is, I guess I'm going to be a little more pointed. How much more is this consulting or this contracting out costing us to, when compared to actually having our own business office and having our own people within that office?
Sure. So we see it as being, and I appreciate the specific question, so I can get back to you with a specific answer. Mm-hmm. But given the need that we have, we've made sure that we can live within our means for this contract, that it's affordable within what we have to spend on a business office. I can give you the exact dollar amount, but I can tell you that I feel like we'll be getting a lot more for our money by investing in a firm that could actually put our business practices in place that desperately need to be there.
So, I mean, just kind of a roundabout thing. Is it more, a lot more?
It's near neutral.
Near neutral, okay. My next question is kind of jumping off Member Thomo's point for training for best practices in teachers. Are we allowing enough time during the actual school day for that training and curriculum development? Because I know one of the biggest things before the receivership was there wasn't enough time in the actual school day to allow those things to happen. What are we doing now to actually have the time in place for teachers to have that curriculum development and training?
Right, great question. So, in fact, I am pleased that our school day has extended both for our students at the elementary and middle school level for this upcoming school year and for our teachers. And so we do have more time during this upcoming school year for planning, for curriculum development, for professional development. Our school year starts off next week with 4 days of professional development before the students come back. Having been a superintendent in another district, I'll tell you, that's very uncommon to have that much time with our teachers before school begins. And doing the planning work with our esteemed administrators here, our principals and our leadership team, it's amazing how much we need to get done in that 4 days, but we're very glad to have it. We also have professional development days during the school year to continue that work, so it's not sort of one and done during those first 4 days, but we can really continue this work, these conversations, this improvement process, all during the school year.
Thank you.
Mr. Bishop, Chairman Bishop.
Thank you. You mentioned RBT, Research for Better Teaching. That was here 10 years ago at Dale Hanley. This was here 10 years ago at Dale Hanley. This was a methodology we used, and it's very effective. What happened to it, I don't know. But it's not something that just arrived here under receivership. I don't want the folks at home to think that this is some grandiose invention from DESE. We used this very successfully a long time ago, and somewhere along the path, it disappeared. I want to talk about that first. Best practices not followed on a consistent basis. Whose job was it to oversee? The receiver, I assume we're talking about here, or the business manager. This is a DESE operation. DESE failed to oversee these people adequately. Would you agree to that?
I would say that going forward, we want to make sure that that type of oversight is in place as we have a new receiver come in.
And I understand we're only the third district to be under receivership. It's a whole new animal for everybody. It's not very well thought out from what I can see. One person with this much autonomy, with an answering to no one, it appears, because this happened. I mean, answering to no one, this happened. I call on our legislature to really revisit this law that allows one person to control a $30 million budget, hundreds of lives and thousands of student lives, really untethered. I mean, it's unbelievable that this is allowed to happen. And this is what happens with big government, and you and DESE are big government. Nobody is going to oversee the dollars and the education of kids in the community better than the people who live in that community. The receiver. I was under the impression that, when I tried to get some information on her disappearance, I was told it was a personnel matter. I was under the impression that the receiver goes out to bid and that's a private entity. That's a contractor for DESE. Am I right in that assumption? She's not an employee of DESE.
No, the receivers are employees of the Commonwealth.
Okay, I'm going to check that. And finally, I'd just like to know, I know it was budgeted last year, $200,000 for unemployment. We spent $450,000. Somebody wanted to know how the budget gets out of line. Well, that's one good example. $450,000 represents 10 beginning teacher salaries. Wouldn't every elementary school teacher like to have one more grade level teacher or more people? What's the projection for this year for unemployment, Dr. Johnson?
Right. That's something I need to get back to you on, to tell you the truth,
Thank you.
in terms of how much we'll be spending on unemployment.
Councilor Manna?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I just want to touch up on something that Chairman Bishop brought up, the best practices not followed on a consistent basis. Are you just talking about last year, or are you talking about years? I mean, is this a combined of years, or is this just from last year?
Right. So we're looking at last year, in particular with the additional funding that I've mentioned before in terms of those discretionary funds. In a sense, there was more money to spend on improvement last year, and it's how those funds were expended where we would want to make sure better practices are followed as we move forward. Because as I mentioned before, the funding that was used out of the general fund to pay for teachers' salaries, for utilities, we're not concerned about whether or not best practices were followed there. It was really about the services that were meant to really kind of enrich the turnaround process is where we want to be paying closer attention.
So I guess my next question then would be, you're just the interim receiver, correct? And there's going to be a permanent receiver. Will the permanent receiver be in town more often than the last receiver was? I mean, are they going to be more involved? I'm just like, I'm concerned.
Sure. So we definitely want to find someone who fulfills the desires of the community. And in fact, if you wouldn't mind, I can move ahead in my presentation. It's actually the next thing that I have to talk to you about is the receiver search. So actually, I needed to just close out by talking about fiscal year 18 briefly, although there is a hand up. So why don't we put a hold on that, and I'll make sure we answer all questions before I go ahead. I'll come back to that. How about that?
Thank you.
Just a quick question. Russ, we're going to hire a contractor to put best practices in and basically revamp the finance department. Am I correct in saying that?
Sure. So the concerns of the finance department go beyond this issue. This issue relates to how those discretionary funds were expended last year, where we're saying discretionary processes, best practices need to be brought to bear. Larger than that, though, are about, the money of the school department is mostly spent on salaries. So we need to get HR right, and HR has to talk to business through systems. Not people, but systems. That's the type of work that we need this contractor to come in and help build appropriately for us.
You're going to bring in a contractor to do that. Are we going to reappoint a finance director to be taught about these best practices while this is happening? Are we building for a handoff back to the town at some point?
Sure. I think we are more successfully building for a handoff back to the town through this method than we would be if we hired somebody in again and tried to get them as a sole individual to fix issues that have been longstanding. So the goal is to get systems in place so that they can be easily explained, easily understood to somebody who can ultimately take them over.
Okay, how about we continue with your presentation, please?
Great, absolutely. So again, just showing where we are for fiscal year 18, what I most want to call out to you, again, keeping our eye on what are the sources of funding. The general fund, as was approved, is a dollar amount that you're familiar with. What we project to be getting in the way of entitlement funds for special education services, Title I services, et cetera, is under entitlement grants. The discretionary funds will be at $1.4 million this year. Many of you are aware of the additional resources that we've received to support the middle school and the high school. They're called school redesign grant funds. So that dollar amount there is this year's portion of those funds plus the strategic support money that the department will provide to the district to continue the important work for the turnaround process. You see the amount that we will have in revolving funds as well as, so that's our projected amount for revolving funds as well as for school lunch. So that's really a brief summary of where we stand for fiscal year 18. Moving into school year 18. So this was the part that I wanted to get to about the receiver search. Obviously, it's very important that we find a new receiver, and really we believe that process needs to begin by listening. So we will be holding community conversations this fall, as early as we can in September, to begin to listen for the qualities and characteristics that the community would like to have in the next receiver. The appointment of the receiver is made by the commissioner. So in this case, our acting commissioner, because our former commissioner, Mitchell Chester, passed away this summer. So Jeff Wolfson, our acting commissioner, is the person who will have the responsibility for appointing a new receiver. When that person is then presented to the district, we want to make sure that the qualities and characteristics that the community said that they wanted to have in that individual. So going to the point that was made earlier about someone who's very present, that we want to make sure that that is embodied in the person who we are able to present to the district as the next receiver. I'm really placing an emphasis over the quality of the individual rather than speed. And so what we've been doing is actually working to, and have actually established a very solid team here in Southbridge, so that we are able to maintain the support for the district as long as we need to. So I will stay as interim receiver for as long as I need to, supported by my team, including Dr. Rodriguez, who you met before. And I'm also pleased that Amy Caruan, who I've introduced, Amy, if you wouldn't mind waving, is also here with us on a one-year contract as an employee to be able to support the work that historically would have maybe fully been embodied in a receiver. So across us, we will make sure that the support that the district needs is in place for this year. And so if we find a new receiver and we're able to bring that person in later this fall, that's fantastic. But if it needs to wait longer than that, we have a team that can make sure we have the supports in place for the district through that time period. Another important note, and then certainly I see some questions, is that the search for the new receiver and those community conversations that I mentioned at the beginning certainly take a lot of effort. And I'm pleased that we've been able to secure funding from a nonprofit called Chiefs for Change, who will be able to actually have an independent person to come and start that receivership process for the district, such as facilitating those community conversations, supporting us in the networking and setting up those initial interviews for receivers. We have a contribution from a nonprofit to be able to help us with that process. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that, and certainly I see some hands up already. Glad to answer any questions you might have.
Councilor DePietro?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could ask the gentleman again, could you please repeat the dollar figure of discretionary funds one more time for us?
For fiscal year 18?
Discretionary funds, line item presented to council for in your FY18 budget.
So I'm talking about discretionary grants, which is different than I think what's in the budget, because the general fund budget is what you're talking about.
I apologize, I'm stepping back a bit, but you did have it on the screen a moment ago. Actually, no, you don't right now. But again, the dollar figure for discretionary funds as a line item.
In the general fund budget.
No, Council McKenzie was kind enough to put it in front of me. $1,132,007 is a figure we have here. Or are we not correct?
I'm sorry?
132,000. No, it's
1.1.
Yeah, it's 1 million.
No, I apologize, sir. Discretionary funds is a line item, and I apologize, I don't have the budget in front of me. But do you?
Sure. So I need to get back to you on that, because I'm talking in this presentation about grant funding. You're asking me about a line item in the general funds, and I would need to get back to you on where the source, what the expenditures will be against that line.
My apologies again. If I may, being we don't have that figure, whose discretion is it as to the disposition of those funds?
Sure. So again, I don't have the budget in front of me right now. I can give you answers on that, but I don't have them in front of me right now.
Fair enough. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Member Ryan?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. So I kind of want to go through that process you just went through again, because if I heard you correctly, and it ultimately one person makes this decision about who's the new receiver, and that's their acting chair of DESI, right?
The acting commissioner.
Acting commissioner, excuse
Yes.
me. So he makes the final decision. Is there no search committee? What is the process for this? And my thing is, what can we do to get the committee more involved in this process? Because I think one of the biggest issues was there was no committee involvement in this decision-making process last time as to who the receiver was going to be. And that led to a receiver who just wasn't qualified to be really leading the district for what was clearly, obviously needed.
So the decision is solely in the hands of the commissioner, in this case, the acting commissioner. So as I said before, the process would be that we would want to start by listening and holding conversations to know more about the qualities and characteristics that we want in a receiver. We would then have an interview process of people who seem to meet those qualities and characteristics, and the commissioner would then make the determination as to which individual to hire.
So would there be a way for the committee to be able to sit in those interview processes, or is the committee excluded and then those interviews are conducted privately?
Sure. So those conversations, those interviews are scheduled without committee involvement.
So there wouldn't be any way for the committee to meet the candidates at all and be able to get a sense of and feel of the entire field of candidates and get a perspective from the committee as to which of the candidates we think would be best?
Right. That is correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Steves.
Well, that was essentially the question I was going to ask, is how the community as a whole gets a say in this interviewing process. Because I think that's part of the reason why we got in the mess last year, because we didn't get a chance to say.
I'm sorry, Member Toma?
Quick question, not a question, but a statement. Following up on what Ms. Manna said in terms of the receiver being around more, how would the council and fellow school committee people, what do you feel about maybe writing DESI and requesting that their candidate, whoever this new receiver be, resides in town during the duration of his or her employment? It may not go anywhere, but I think it'd be important for someone such as a receiver to live in Southbridge, get a good pulse of the community. That's just my opinion. It may not go anywhere.
Councilman Manna?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I don't think that actually we would be able to do that because it's not dictated in our charter anywhere that any town employee has to live in Southbridge. And it's technically, it's not up to us who is hired, it's up to the state. Unfortunately, the school committee doesn't have a say in it because of the receivership. The town never had a say in it. I think the community conversations is a good place to start, and I would also like to see, once there is, even with you, the interim receiver, I was getting like once every couple of weeks, we were getting updates, even once a week, I think, and then that, all of a sudden, it just stopped. I wasn't getting mine anymore. I don't know about anybody else. I can only speak for myself. I think that's something that I would like to see from the current administration right now and going forward. Especially, there's a lot of financial issues, and past and present, so,
And to address that point, actually, we are planning already for how we will revive communications with the entire town, including you, around the progress that's being made in the school department. So you can look forward to a restoration of regular messaging from the school department about the activities that are going on within the schools.
That'd be great, because, there's some people can't make it to the community conversations, and maybe is there an email address where they can make some suggestion or what they would like? Is there going to be a form that's going to go out to the parents?
Sure. So we are designing the process now. We want to make sure it's a very robust process, is the bottom line.
Okay, thank you.
And I just point out again that I mentioned again last night that any information coming from the school that's coming to the chair of council and vice chair of council is going to all council members as well as anybody else that the school is providing for. So you are on their email list in terms of any notices or meetings or those types of things. So I just want to mention that again. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've seen some come across from the secretary, but this was from our past.
I understand
yes.
your
Okay.
as well, Councilor Manna. updates are very important to the community.
Thank you.
Councilor McKenzie and then Member Walzer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do believe that the school committee, while it is still in office, should at least have some input, whether it's a reference, whether it's a private meeting with your office, to be able to have an understanding of, like you're saying, what are we looking for? I think the school committee probably has the best insight as to what we might be looking for, and I think that we should utilize their talents, and even if it's in a private meeting, to have input and to. So I would look for that. The second thing, and this has really nothing to do with the receivership, but I want to ask you a question, and I want to ask you, what steps would be put in place to hold the students accountable for their behavior, for their schoolwork, for their homework, and how would parents be held responsible for the positive efforts of the children?
Certainly. So a big emphasis this year is actually on culture and climate from within our schools and making sure that our students know what the expectations for their learning are and are reinforced for positively demonstrating those expectations on a regular basis. So, you know how I was telling you before about the school improvement plans that each principal is in charge of for this upcoming year? Those plans are actually rich with the steps that each school will be taking to have students not only be held accountable, but very much taught how to follow those expectations and reinforced for following them. In addition, we are very much enhancing our family and community engagement from within the school department. We have a new director of families and school engagement who's overseeing the work of the liaisons, who we've always had in the district, but who certainly we hope could do even more to support our families, not simply through activities in the school, but more seeing our parents as partners in the learning of the children in this district.
Thank you.
Member Laza.
The previous speaker, with all due respect, that was a great question. It's a question that a lot of the people in Southbridge ask about discipline. And I understand what Mr. Johnson is talking about, but I think what you're talking about might be consequences for bad behavior. And that's something that has to be worked on in this district, especially in a few places a little more than others. But I really, that question was excellent. Getting back to the point of the receiver, the last time we chose a receiver, we are elected officials. The gentleman on the side of me was high vote getter in the last election. Very powerful vote by Dr. Page, Mr. Bishop, myself. You can go around and talk about the other school committee members. They have the total commitment of the people, and they voted for us. In a democracy, in a representative form of government, what happens is these people up here become the representatives and the voice. Although we always have forums to try and get people to come forward, we want to know what you're thinking. I think when you're picking a superintendent, although you can go out and poll the people, I think what happens is somebody that has a tremendous amount of experience in the field of education probably knows what a superintendent looks like, what it should be, what the qualifications are. I always like the noble work of going out to the public. In the end, the people that are going to have to work with this person is basically a school committee, if there is any plan of handing back over. And the last time we did the same thing. We went out community. Desi went out and worked on this. We hired somebody that was never a superintendent. Without any superintendent experience, and I was told by the commissioner himself, that's the one. And I looked at him and I said, I don't think so. And I left the meeting, but I was talking to my colleagues, and I had great doubts. Great doubts, because when you have somebody that has been a superintendent, it's like hiring a teacher that's taught before. There is some value in what they have for experience, because if there's one thing that taught me something, history, it seems to repeat itself. And I don't want history to repeat itself here with this receivership appointment, because it's the commissioner's call. I understand that. The commissioner's going to have to be a little more open-minded than the last one about, we're going to have to work with this person. I mean, the school committee is going to have to, I mean, if there's any going to hand off in the future, if this is something that's just going to go on for, I'll run 6 times, it doesn't matter to me. I'm going to see this district come out of a receivership. I will be on this school committee, whether it's 10 years from now. But I think we don't want to repeat the same mistake. We have to urge, I want to be at the table looking at that commissioner. The commissioner didn't want to talk to us last time. Didn't even want to talk to us. I had to go see the senator and the rep to get a sit down with the commissioner, and he was less than pleasant to us. But he looked at us as the enemy, the school committee, and he took over because the new school committee was not the answer. Here we are today, proved him wrong. He's not here to hear it. I wish he was. And I sit here and I look at you, and I want to believe that we, with the new acting commissioner, we can get some sort of, you want to know what's going on in Southbridge? Ask anybody up here, ask anybody on the streets, they're talking about it. We need to have input. We need to know who we're going to be working with and the characteristics. We need an experienced educational architect to rebuild this district. And if we don't get that, we'll be here 6 or 7 years from now, and I'll still be talking to you. We need to do this together. We can't do it apart. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Lazo. Member Lazo. If I could, this is great dialogue, but if we could, we're rehashing some of the same, and I think the sentiment's been really clear. So if our questions and comments, it's 9 o'clock, we want to keep moving the process and hear anything else that Mr. Johnston has to say. So if we could just kind of summarize our questions a little bit tighter, that would be nice. Thank you. Member Ryan?
I'll make my question very quick. You talked about speed, quality over speed. What timeline do you have, if there is one on the table, for getting a new receiver in the district? And how does that affect the timeline that was given to us at the beginning for 3 to 5 years for a turnaround? How does that impact now with the old receiver being gone and now having to be on a search for a new one?
Certainly. So to start with your first question about what's our timeline, I really emphasize quality over speed. So it will take as long as it takes. If we find a great individual who's ready to start this fall, that's fantastic. If we find a great individual who can't start until later in the calendar year of 2018, then it's worth waiting for that individual. So quality will drive this as opposed to a specific timeline. The timeline starts with those community conversations. So we know how it starts, but how it ends really depends on the quality of the candidate who we get. I want the very best person. I'm certainly not investing the amount of time that I am to be the least bit uncertain as to who this next person is. So definitely willing to wait. Right now, nothing changes about the fact that we have a 3-year turnaround plan. And the statute is very clear that at the end of the 3 years, there'll be a reevaluation by the commissioner about whether or not the plan extends beyond 3 years. So a receiver, the hiring of a receiver, does not change the timeline for the turnaround plan. Great.
You have more to offer?
Absolutely. So I'm not going to rehash this because we've already talked about that there is more school level involvement in the turnaround plan. Moving to the school committee, and I really appreciated the question, Ms. Ryan, that you asked earlier this evening, and I was pleased actually that I knew that I already had a slide devoted to this, that I do intend and do very much want for there to be more school committee involvement in the decision making for the district. And so Mr. Bishop and I pitched this to him last week to let him know that I'd be discussing this tonight. And what I'd like to see happen is that at our September meeting, now that we have a chair and a vice chair as of tonight, that we would have appointees to 2 advisory subcommittees, one for budget and one for curriculum. Those are the 2 most essential functions of the district. Policy wouldn't be far behind, but it's not the highest priority right now to rewrite the policy manual. And so I am asking the school committee to appoint its membership to 2 subcommittees who can meet with me on a regular basis, and we'll determine what type of regularity we will have for that, to discuss budget issues separate from curriculum issues. So I'm talking about 2 subcommittees that I'd like to meet with on a regular basis, so that the types of concerns that you've raised in the past about things like not knowing enough about the budget in advance of the budget process that begins later in the spring, I'd like to have more of that dialogue going throughout the year. In addition, I'd like to have 2 appointees confirmed for this year to the receiver roundtable. We know that there has been interest from the committee in the past. I just want to make sure we know officially who it is for this new school year at our September meeting. So we'll be following up further about that, but I wanted to make sure that the committee knew where I'd like to see their involvement going for this upcoming year. Certainly welcome other questions, and we can talk about it outside of this meeting about particular roles for school committee members. But in addition to, I can actually pause there and see if there are any questions.
Russ, you want 3 members on each of those subcommittees with an alternate?
That's correct.
Okay, and how about who's going to appoint the 2 appointees to the roundtable? You want that from this?
From the committee itself. So what I would appreciate is actually if committee members are interested, to please funnel their interest to you, Mr. Bishop, and then you and I will talk before the next meeting to confirm those appointments. The involvement of the union is also important, and I believe that both by working more closely with the school committee and the teachers union, again, we're building ways of doing business that could ultimately pave the pathway forward for an end to receivership, as opposed to waiting till we get to the end of receivership and then saying, let's bring these parties together. So previously I introduced my plan for involving the school committee. As it relates to the union, I had very ongoing and positive discussions with the union, including a tentative agreement reached with the union pending a ratification vote on a new contract. In addition, through the work of what's in that tentative agreement and what we have in place as well, through the receivership, is extended time, as we've already discussed today, and a teacher career ladder with a performance compensation system in it for this year as well. And I've actually met with every new teacher who we've hired this year and explained that system, and I've been just very pleased by the support that the new teachers have had for hearing about that and knowing what it means for them to advance in their careers here in Southbridge. Finally, just as we look ahead, I mentioned that we are just closing out new teacher orientation, so 3 days with our new teachers that conclude tomorrow. What I'm really excited about happening tomorrow is that our new teachers are going on a tour of Southbridge. I think too often, and I'm talking about all of my experiences working in a school district, sometimes the teachers just aren't familiar with the community that they're serving. And so we've reached out to various community leaders and business leaders from within Southbridge, and we're getting on buses tomorrow with our new teachers and taking them around the town to talk to parents, to talk to community leaders, to talk to business leaders, and find out more about the history, the present, and the future of Southbridge, because we want our new teachers to see this community for its assets and for all that it has to bring for our young people, and to know that as they get started, and to know what various voices in the community say that matters about Southbridge. So I'm really excited for that to happen tomorrow. Our full administrative team is actually joining the tour, so it'll be a great opportunity for there to be an exchange between our administrators and our new teachers. In addition, Convocation Week is actually 4 days. It kicks off next Tuesday, so there's 4 days of professional development that we have with our staff, and we've invited the school committee, and certainly would extend the invitation to town council as well, to attend our kickoff next Tuesday at 8:30 at the middle and high school auditorium, and our first day with students, very much looking forward to on August 28th. So certainly welcome any final questions that you might have, and I hope that you have found this helpful.
When you take them around, I hope that building's torn down 100%. I'd like to thank the council for ripping the building down on Main Street, which is an eyesore. You don't want the teachers to see that. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Okay. Yes, Chairman Bishop.
I just want to thank you, Dr. Johnson. I know this is a very uncomfortable evening tonight, a lot of hard questions. We have concerns, and I applaud you for having the courage to come here tonight and put out the answers you knew. And I'm confident you'll get back to all the members here tonight with any of the stuff that you didn't have readily available. So I want to thank you, and it's a beatdown, okay? You just took a 2-hour, hour and a half beatdown, and then, you know. But we have a lot of concerns, and we're here to work with you. We're not here to kill anybody. You know, we're here to work with you, and nobody here is being paid. Okay, we're here to do what's best for the kids and the community as a whole. Okay, but I want to thank you personally.
My pleasure.
Are there any, Councilor DePietro?
Madam Chair, I apologize. It's been so long, I'm not sure what agenda item we're on.
At the end. Almost. We're just about at the end.
Yeah.
Why, are you looking for something specific, sir?
I did want to make a comment to the school committee at the end of this meeting, to thank each and every one of you for a job that I think is the only one that is more thankless than being a town councilor. God bless every one of you, and please keep at it.
I also want to extend a thank you, Mr. Johnston. You've been wonderful, a few meetings that we've had, and explaining things, and coming out this evening and staying out at this hour to explain to us, to the community, as best you can. And certainly we are looking for more answers going forward and more accountability, and we look forward to getting that and having a partnership that really does work, because we cannot continue with the way things were. It needs to be better. We need to demand it for this community, that it gets better. And I think you've heard the sentiment here on this board with all the elected officials. There's a lot of us up here. I want to thank the school committee for allowing us to have the joint meeting here with you this evening after your meeting and staying out late. And I want to especially thank the town council, who was here last night till very late hours doing town business, and here again tonight. It's, as you say, sometimes a thankless job, but technically, anytime you look around this community and you see the students and you see the people that we serve, it's worth it. It's worth every hour, minute, concern that we have. So thank you all for being here this evening. If there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. I think we got a lot of them. Great. All those in favor, hand vote. Looks good. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.